India. Please welcome Lorien and Ferose to tell us a little bit more about this event.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. So let me maybe spend 10 minutes explaining the genesis of this and why me and Lorien felt, Lorien, maybe you can come here to do this. So just a quick background, I was based in Bangalore for many years before I moved to Palo Alto 5 years back. And I spent a couple of years also in Germany. So I'm kind of traveled around the world. And I moved to the Valley primarily because I wanted to take care of my son who's on the spectrum, couldn't find enough help in India, so I moved here. But at that time, I was heading SAP's globalization services, had a team around the world, and I met Lorien on various professional commitments. But the best part of our discussion, when we finished discussing about AI and SAP and other stuff, was really this question about, are we using technology to solve some of the real problems of the world? This was really the interesting thing. So if we spent 2 hours discussing SAP solutions, we probably spent 4 hours discussing, are we all doing the right stuff here, right? And that took us into an incredible journey. And I would like to share some insights from that journey. And I went around asking a lot of the top tech thinkers, including, of course, Vint here, is this the real reason why we should be using technology for? And I must confess that I was a little disappointed with the answers that I got. A lot of people told me things in private which they would never tell in public. Right? That was a funny thing. Right? Privately, they will say, we are maximizing this for our own benefit, but really, are we using it for the larger good? Was a big question. So I said, how do I bring this discussion in a much more open, non-threatening form that we can, discuss this in a format like this, where there is no liabilities to anybody, but really we can talk about it openly. So that was the idea, and we said, why don't we do a event around really focusing on AI and DI, because we thought those were the technologies which may have some massive unintended consequences. And hence we said, let's do something called the Responsible AIDI Summit. So I'll kind of share a few insights, also a few topics that we are actually working on. So it's just not theory, but really can we do something about it? And maybe share a little bit about the manifesto or the core principles behind the event. So here is the first thing. This was, how many of you read this? Right? This was interesting, right? Now, my question was, why do you think this happened now? I mean, why now, right? You can ask this question.
I would guess in part because the disparity, wealth disparity is so dramatic.
Yeah.
I think people finally cannot escape recognizing that. The last time this happened was in the late 1800s and the early 1900s.
Absolutely. So it was funny that almost 5 years back, I was at Davos and we were looking at some interesting numbers, right? And they said in the 2010, I think 162 people earned as much as the half of the world's population. Every year, progressively, that number reduced. And today, 5 or the top 4 people earn as much as the bottom half of the population, right? Now, this is something that we all saw coming. And so I was like, why is this happening now? And so I looked back at history and looked at, did people predict this? And, as interesting as it could be in 1940s, Gandhi already said this would happen. 1940s. And I've been studying Gandhi for almost 2 decades. And he actually said this in a very interesting form, which many people find it deeply insightful. And that was, he said, entrepreneurship is a rare skill. And if you maximize for a rare skill, the wealth will get concentrated in the hands of the few. As simple as that. He said, everybody cannot be an entrepreneur. Let's understand that. It is a rare skill. I don't understand numbers, right? So, but if somebody did and you maximize for that, you will focus everything on that. And so he had already seen this in 1940, and he had actually proposed an alternate model, and we've written extensively about it, called trusteeship, which says that you're not against capitalism. So he was not against capitalism, he was not against communism, but he said there is going to be a mid path, and he said that way is called trusteeship. And the whole idea is extremely simple. He says that if you maximize for a single skill, which means you are saying, the wealth goes to all the entrepreneurs who make it successful. He says, don't assume that he himself was only responsible for making it successful, right? So he says, if you are the CEO of a company, the assumption that you are single most person responsible for the success is fundamentally flawed. And so he says, how is it that the wealth gets focused on one person or a handful of few or the shareholders? He says, everybody in the community has a role to play. So he says, while you should get enough money for yourself and your family and maybe even more, but remember you are a trustee of the wealth. So you are a trustee. So you are supposed to keep the wealth, but the wealth has to be used for the larger community. And that was the whole idea behind trusteeship. So it's not just focus the wealth on a handful of few, but you are the trustee of the wealth, use it for the larger good. He spoke about this in 1940s, and he says, if you don't do that, capitalism will come to the end because the wealth will be focused in a handful of few people. I think in the next 5 years, if things don't change, we will all live in the Amazonian world, right? Everything will be owned by Amazon.com. That's where we will end up eventually. As I said, 2010, 162 people earned as much of the world's population. Now it's 5 or 4. Yeah, you can do the math. So it will end up focused in the hands of the few. Here is what interestingly happened. 181 companies signed the agreement where they said the interest of the customers, interest of the employees, interest of the community will be before the interest of the shareholders. And if somebody had told this even a few months back, they would have said, are you smoking? This is not going to happen. Of course, people have now, debating, is this real or is this good PR? Is this real? We have to really see what this all means, but at least there is an intention with these large companies to say, we will keep the interest of the employees, the customers, and the community ahead of the shareholders. We'll have to see what this means, but I'm not surprised that this happened. I know Peter has a question there. Yes, SAP is one of them? Okay, on par. Not ahead of, in par of, at the same level as the shareholders, yeah, which is already a big step forward, right? My big question is, if you have to choose between laying off a few employees and giving returns to the shareholders, which would you take? Is it one or the other? I don't know. As I said, the actions will speak what all of this means, right? But again, the whole idea is Gandhi had actually put this in incredibly simple terms. Yeah, he had put this in incredibly simple terms. He said, the first thing is the purity of means. He said, the way you earn your money is sometimes more important than what you do with it. Yeah, purity of means, which means that, people often tell me this, that, you can't be running a tobacco company and then spend all the money on healthcare, right? I mean, that like seems very contradiction, right? So the purity of means is incredibly important. Do right to start with. And I think a lot of times I see especially in the West, people have this notion that, okay, let me accumulate wealth at all costs and then I give it away. So that's a very different point of view. The second thing is, of course, simple living and high thinking, and I shouldn't be saying this sitting on the 48th floor today. Right? This is anything but simple living and high thinking. But, this was his core idea. Yeah. Yeah. We are on the 48th floor, right? And the last thing is keep people first. And the reason I was, there is this alternate economic model that Vint has spoken about and beautifully written this in the people-centered economy. And I often ask, is this, Vint, a very idealist point of view, or is this even remotely possible? But this is an exact opposite model of the current economic system, which keeps tasks at the center of everything, right? And the people-centered economy says we will keep people at the center of everything. This is this is a amazing insight. I've contributed a chapter, but I'm sure Vint will talk a little bit more about it. So keep people at the center, not task at the center of what you do. That's the whole idea behind the people-centered economy. So we looked at some data and numbers, right? So we said, let's look at what are the top 10 problems in the world. And so this was done based on a study by World Economic Forum. They looked at 31,000 millennials and asked them, what do you think is the top 10 problems in the world? Climate change, large-scale conflict, inequality, poverty, blah, blah, blah. These are the top 10. I'll put my friend Kamesh, who's in this room, in the spot right now. We met, and he's a great technologist. Just so that he doesn't tell this publicly, but I can tell you, he did 26 startups. Okay, pretty successful one. 26, and I'm like, Kamesh, did any of your startups solve any of these top 10 problems? Right? And the answer was not really, right? And being in the Silicon Valley, I was like, I'm meeting all these brilliant minds, and actually nobody's solving this problem. So why is it that the best minds on earth, and I'm seeing that I'm running out of time, but I'm still going to speak anyway, so but I think it's important to set the context. Yes. But the big question was, are the best thinkers in the world solving these problems, right? And you can guess what the answer is, and I'm so delighted that Lorien's book is out today, which actually talks about this question: are we using AI to solve the real problems of the world? This is what actually I found, what the psychologists will call it. So here is what happens, and this is a brilliant phenomena called private truths and public lies, right? What is the best example of this? When sometimes people come home for dinner and the food is bland, you would normally not tell that, right? You would say, the food was very good. That's a simple example of what is a private truth but a public lie. But Timur found this happens in society at scale. Best example, what happened in the previous election. People voted for Trump, but everybody said they didn't. And that's why all the analysts got the numbers wrong, because when they asked them, whom did you vote? They said they voted for Hillary, but actually they voted for Trump, and you saw what happened. So he has said that preferential falsification happens at scale, and a lot of times these has massive consequences. Why am I saying this? Because I saw the same thing happening with technologists. Privately, they will say, we are not really solving all the AI or the technology for all the right reasons. Publicly, they will never say it. And that has consequences. Massive consequences. And so it is important that your private truth becomes a public truth as well, right? Not the other way around. So, what we said as a fundamental principle, this is not about promoting anybody, no individual, no product, no company, even though we are at SAP, but we're not trying to talk about any of our products here. But really, once we remove this, and if this is our core manifesto, and we say it's work in progress, we say do no harm, purity of means, walk the talk, ecosystem, not ecosystem, and trusteeship. And finally, this is what we've been working on for the last couple of years, and I will not steal the thunder from Kamesh. I think it's a brilliant idea, but is there a better way, and can technology be used to redistribute wealth in a meaningful manner? And we believe there is a possibility, and Lorien has spoken about it in the book as well. But I think Kamesh will speak more in detail later in the panel. Lorien, sorry, I took all your time and more, but over to you.
No worries, thank you. Can I have the clicker? Yeah. Humanity has a vast new superpower. We have terabytes, exabytes, and I don't know what the next level is of data about the universe. Yottabytes, thank you, the planet Earth and people. Yet adjacent to this mountain of data are deserts. Only 1% of that data, these days I think it's less than 1%, has actually been analyzed either by a computer or by a human. AI is a great, but not the only technique to do that analysis. And an even smaller fraction of that data has been converted into effective action. So we are in the infancy of this world. We've been given this amazing resource, which we might think of as a seventh sense of humanity. NASA spends billions of dollars to get data out into the world, not through eyes or ears, but through sensors on spaceships like Cassini and Voyager. There's massive amounts of personal data, massive amounts of satellite data in an exploding Earth imaging ecosystem. It is up to us to decide what to do with this. It is a huge opportunity and a massive untapped resource. So let's jump right in and talk about how we do this and what we mean about DI. So for instance, we might have an AI. Who has ever had a computer send you some content that it thought you might like? Okay, right? So maybe I start out thinking I should protect the prairie dogs. And so I click on the likes about the prairie dogs. The platform then knows my interests, and based on that interest, it's going to feed me ads because that's its business model, as well as send me new content about prairie dogs. Okay, so over time, this is a feedback resonance effect, right? Which goes around and around in a geometric progression, spitting out cash for the social media platform. But as I do that, what would have previously been a variety of information sources becomes polarized. Certain things become emphasized, and other sources of information, the people who say baby prairie dogs aren't such great people and we shouldn't protect them, I don't get to hear that as much. That's one view of this filter bubble that everybody's talking about. So there's AI powering something very powerful that in the near term generates value for me, perhaps, because it's kind of entertaining to get content that reinforces my previously held beliefs, as well as advertising revenues for some social media company. But that filter bubble in the longer term, and you may or may not agree with this chain of events, I put it up here as a starting point, leads to a reduced exposure to diverse viewpoints, reduced ability to separate truth from falsity, reduced informed citizenry, and reduced democracy. Now, you may or may not agree to that chain. That's not my point, is that this chain is correct. My point is that by drawing these kinds of pictures, we can have structured, kind, respectful conversations about whether this is true, whether the short-term things we do lead to long-term negatives, and what the societal as well as individual consequences are. This short-term versus long-term pattern plays out in lots of places, especially as we talk about things like the commons. If I put some money into a common resource, that might be a short-term pain for me, but ultimately it might increase my safety as well as my value. This is possibly the most important slide of this century, okay? Not because I drew it, but this concept is so important that we understand that we actually hurt ourselves if we don't invest in commons resources, which have massive geometric synergistic effects. This lobster claw pattern is very widespread. Things that we understand pretty well in near terms, near space, locally, and in near time, actually have many times unintended consequences, massive, unexpected effects in long time. This is the essence of what decision intelligence is. It's about surrounding this massive data resource and the AI that helps us analyze it and does things like push social media to us, and understand the context in which that AI occurs, the ripple effect that has out in space and time that impacts people and technology and the world and climate. Kazi defines this as the discipline of turning information into better actions at any scale. So why do we do those causal things? Because we're going to take some action. And that action, starting some social media company, has these effects that eventually lead to a variety of outcomes. DI is the science and the academic as well as the technology discipline of understanding how actions lead to outcomes. And so it helps us with this great problem that we face. So although this technology is in its infancy, there are challenges like the Sustainable Development Goals that desperately need us. In fact, I would argue, and I will take 20 more seconds, that these challenges are not separate. They're deeply interdependent. And I made this up on the plane. We might call this the complex holoptic unified multi-link problem. It's one problem. It's not separate. Women, poverty, climate, food, all of these are actually the same problem because they're deeply interlinked. And maybe we call it CHUMP. I don't know. I made that up. Challenge to you to find a better acronym. I made it up on the plane. So responsible AI is about reducing negative impacts of the tech while maximizing the positive impacts of both AI and DI. And bottom line, humanity has a new superpower. Data along with its analysis and effective actions. What will you do to help? Thank you for being here. This is the start.